Hi, everybody. This is Jake Burley, producer of Prosthetic Gods, breaking the fourth wall to bring you a very special treat. On March 2nd, we recorded a live episode of the show at the Music Hall in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. This event was titled Artificial Intelligence and Human Values and was part of the University of New Hampshire's Sidore lecture series. The evening started with brief TED-style talks from Northeastern's Kay Mathieson, Cambridge University's Henry Shevlin, and UT Austin's Harvey Lederman. Then, Nir and J led a live discussion on stage with the three speakers and members of the audience. We hope you enjoy this very special episode, and thank you all for listening.
Okay, everyone, let's get started. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We are so thrilled, slightly baffled to see so many of you here for a philosophy event. We are absolutely delighted to have you with us. My name is Max Edwards. I am a member of the philosophy department and the ethics center at UNH. I will be something of a host for this evening, and we really are so excited for the evening we have in store for all of you. To kick us off, we are going to ask Michelle Dillon, the Dean of the College of Liberal Arts at UNH, to share a few words with us. So please join me in welcoming Dean Dillon.
Good afternoon, evening, everybody. It's wonderful to see such a great turnout this afternoon. I think 5 o'clock is still afternoon, and it is bright outside, but you're in for a wonderful evening of absolutely enriching intellectual engagement. So briefly, I want to, of course, thank Professor Edwards and Professor Claude Brink for taking the leadership in organising this evening's event. As Dean of the College of Liberal Arts, I'm very proud that philosophy is taking the lead, philosophy colleagues in the university, and in interaction with many other colleagues across UNH on this very, very important topic that becomes ever more timely with every hour that passes. And we're very grateful, of course, to the Sidore family, and Professor Megan Howie from the Centre for the Humanities will say a few words about the wonderful Sidore funding and the series that we've been very privileged to host for the last many years. I would just really, again, want to commend all of you for taking seriously the topic of artificial intelligence. I know many here may not be used to reading the documents of the Vatican. That's something I sometimes do. And a year ago, the Vatican Dicastery for Culture and Education issued a very good report on artificial intelligence. And among the many points, they, of course, are very concerned about the issue of ethics and human dignity. And one of the key takeaways in that report was the emphasis that we always have to keep reminding ourselves and remembering that artificial intelligence is created and has been created by human intelligence. So making sure to keep the human at the very center of everything we do, as we should do in general with the world, but particularly when it comes to artificial intelligence, when it's so easy to get carried away with all of the stories about how it is going to truly be a transhumanistic endeavor. I think about 20 years ago, I first heard the term transhumanism, and I said, oh, that's not relevant to me. I don't care about cyborgs and those sorts of things. Clearly, the world has changed dramatically, not only in the last 20 years, but even in the last 2 or 3 years when we come to looking at generative AI. So it's really, really wonderful. And again, I thank our colleagues for taking on this initiative. And I know you're going to have a wonderful evening this evening with our distinguished speakers, and again tomorrow. And I just hope I know we'll all learn something, and keep in mind all the many lessons we're going to learn and ideas that stimulate us as we move forward, and share them with others who can't be here this evening. So thank you all again very much.
Thank you so much, Dean Dillon. And now I would like to call on Megan Howie, Director of the Centre for the Humanities at UNH, to say a word or two about Saul Sidore. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, everyone, for being here. Like Michelle said, I think I'm shorter than Michelle. Is that possible? It's possible. I'm Megan Howie. As you said, I'm a professor of anthropology at UNH, and I'm the director of the Center for the Humanities, which stewards the Saul O. Sidore Memorial Lecture Series. Organized thematically, the series presents speakers in engaging presentations directed at the broad university community as well as the public beyond the university, and funded in part by an annual gift from the Saul O. Sidore Memorial Foundation. The series has for more than 40 years, which is pretty incredible, been a highlight of the academic year. And at the start of each fall semester, we invite colleagues from across the university to submit proposals on timely and important themes. This year, the UNH Philosophy Department, the recently established UNH Center for Ethics, which has the broader aim of bringing together faculty, students, and community members to engage ethical questions that shape our shared lives. Among these, one of them being artificial intelligence, they came forward with this idea and great proposal to have this critical public dialogue at this time about this pressing topic. And the lead organizers, I really took the lead, as Michelle Dean Dillon already said. Claudia Brink and Max Edwards really took the lead and did a lot of heavy lifting. We want to thank them for this artificial intelligence and human values of public conversation. The center's so appreciative of the tremendous work that they did. And also I want to make sure the center thanks Rebecca Norris, who did a lot of administrative support to help make this possible. And then I also, she's not here, but Katie Humans, the assistant director of the Center for the Humanities, did a ton of work also to help make this happen. So tomorrow, this continues on campus. I just want to make sure to explain a little bit about who Saul Sidore was, and this series being established. It was established in 1965 in memory of Saul Sidore. I think his life embodies a lot of things that right now are important to remember, are worthwhile and valuable. He was a humanitarian and businessman from Manchester, New Hampshire. And he wanted this series, his kids in his memory, to offer a place to have critical and sometimes controversial discussions about issues facing our society. He really valued lively dialogue around pressing issues, and his kids did this in his memory, and they wanted free expression and hard conversations to be at the heart of this. They wanted it to be free and open to the public as well. Saul Sidore was a first-generation American, born in New York City in 1907. He lost his job during the Great Depression, and he and his future wife moved to New Hampshire in 1940 and opened a knitting mill. And by 1955, Sidore was the president of Brookshire Mills and Pandora Industries of Manchester. His business practices were really ahead of his time. They reflected his ethical principles and his interest in providing security for his employees. He pioneered a profit-sharing plan. This is in the 40s and 50s, right? So a pension plan, founded a scholarship loan fund to help his employees send their children to college. And he was the first employer in New Hampshire to hire an industrial psychologist and institute insured hospitalization benefits for his employees. Again, really relevant and ahead of his time. Sidore encouraged employees of all levels to participate in business decisions. He created a joint committee of executives and employees to discuss their issues and held quarterly meetings to discuss the company's future. He was also the owner of Manchester Free Press, where he published a lot of open to publishing controversial and widespread dialogue ideas. He was a member of the New Hampshire Advisory Committee to the United States Commission on Civil Rights. He was very active in Manchester's Jewish community, and he was a driving force in supporting the ideals of humanity throughout New Hampshire, and this is the legacy that we have today with this series. So I think this topic fits that when we talk about humanity perfectly and what that means. So thanks so much for coming, and the speakers for coming. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean Dillon, and thank you, Megan. And on behalf of the Philosophy Department and the Center for Ethics, I would like to add our profound gratitude to the Sidore family. I would also like to thank sincerely Seco Sips of Science, a wonderful, wonderful organization who has been so generous to us. Without your help, it would have been impossible for us to host this event and bring it to such a broad audience. I want to thank in particular Christine Caputo, who has been a dream to work with. I really hope that this will be the first of many fruitful collaborations with the Seco Sips of Science. So thank you, the Sidore family. Thank you to the Seco Sips of Science. And finally, I would like to thank Professor Scott Smith of the RGSCP initiative at UNH, who gave us this wonderful opportunity to take the reins tonight. So thanks to all. Thank you. We wanted to put together this evening out of a growing sense that something momentous and strange is happening. In the past few years, artificial intelligence has infused every sphere of human life, from the personal to the social to the political. We see it in the home. We see it in the classroom. We see it in the workplace. We see it on the battlefield. All of a sudden, we find ourselves in an age of chatbot therapists, AI learning platforms, digital deep fakes, autonomous weapons systems. And this is just the beginning. Our friends in Silicon Valley cheerfully inform us that we could expect 100 years of technological innovation in the next 5, 1,000 years of scientific progress in the next 10. Where is this going? And where does it leave us? On the other side of the technological revolution that we are living through, assuming there's a place for us there, who will we be? What will survive of the human experience as we have known it? What new and beautiful avenues of fulfillment and flourishing will open to us, and which will close? What will we discover? What will we forget? These questions speak to all of us. Tonight, we confront them with 5 wonderful thinkers who join us from far and wide and come together this evening for the first time. We will have 3 rapid-fire talks, and then we will bring our speakers together in conversation in a live podcast episode. We will hear about the epistemic risks of AI, about the ways in which human-AI relations are changing old orthodoxies about the nature of the mind, about the ways in which the new world we are ushering in will force us to create a new culture. If everybody is ready, I think we can get started. Our first speaker for today, for this evening, is Kay Mathieson. Kay is Associate Professor of Philosophy at Northeastern University. She is an expert in social epistemology, ethics, and political philosophy. And she combines those areas of expertise in her research into information and computer ethics. She's currently at work on a manuscript entitled Informational Justice. And this evening, she speaks to us about the seriousness of the threat posed by digital fakes. So please join me in welcoming our first speaker, Kay Mathieson.
Thanks, everybody, for coming. This is a wonderful crowd we've got here. And I really want to encourage you to join me in a conversation. As you know, the earliest philosopher was Socrates. And how did he carry out his philosophy? It was through dialogue and conversation. So I'd really like to encourage you to think with me through this talk and think about, maybe even objections, places where you think I've got it wrong or I'm missing something, because that's how philosophers are able to improve and how we can make our ideas even stronger. So this talk is entitled, How Serious is the Threat of the Epistemic Threat of Digital Fakes? And I want to just real quickly, for that word epistemic, if you don't remember what it just means knowledge. It just means the study of knowledge. So we're talking about what are the threat that digital fakes pose to our ability to know and have knowledge. This talk is based on a paper I wrote with Don Fallis. I wanted to give him some recognition. And just at the start, here are some examples of the kinds of digital fakes we're thinking about. We're thinking about bots posing as people, fake people. We're thinking about deep fakes, where there's videos that appear to be of, in this case, Tom Cruise, but are not. And we're talking also about fake news, which maybe a lot of you remember was a big topic a few years ago. So there's a number of philosophers who have been writing and warning of the infopocalypse. The infopocalypse, the idea is that it's given all these fakes flooding our world. At some point, we are going to be in a situation where there's nothing we can trust anymore. We won't know what's real or false, and so we won't be able to know things. We could just say, okay, well, I don't want to be fooled, so I'll withhold belief. But if we do that, then we're in the infopocalypse, because now we can't know things. We can't learn things. So all these philosophers, I'll tell you, that's Don Fallis, Deborah Johnson, Luciano Floridi, Daniel Dennett, and Regina Rini have written about this danger. However, there are other philosophers who say, no, it's not that dangerous. You're way overstating it. You guys are just the Chicken Littles of deep fakes. Like, oh no, it's all terrible. And so in this talk, what I'm going to do is I'm going to briefly talk about Don and my definition of what a fake is. And then I'm going to go through these arguments that people have given to say, don't worry your pretty little head about digital fakes and how we're responding to them. And then at the end, I'm going to see if there's some lessons we can learn about about our little AI chatbot friends. Are they real friends or are they fake friends? All right, so first, if we're going to talk about fakes, we need to define our terms, as Voltaire said. So that's what we're going to start with really quickly. So just to kind of get your intellectual juices going and kind of take it into the everyday experience, we all have encountered fakes in our world. There's forgeries, there's decoys, there's counterfeits, and there's replicas, are just some examples of fakes that we encounter in our world. Now, we have developed a definition of fake after going through all the definitions out there and trying to figure out which is the best one that actually covers the concept of fake the best. This is what we've come up with. And if you have any counterexamples to that definition, I would love to hear them, because we're going to put this in print soon. So our definition is a fake is something that is intended to appear to be an X when it is not, or has the function of appearing to be an X when it's not. So the fake Mona Lisa was created to appear to be the real Mona Lisa when it's not. The fake coyote, again, created to appear to be a real coyote, etc. Now, one thing that makes our definition different from some other definitions is we don't think something has to be deceptive to be a fake. So, for instance, we have fake Christmas trees and fake fruit, but neither of those are intended to deceive. So the kinds of fakes we most worry about are the ones that are intended to deceive, but it doesn't have to be that way. And another important feature of our definition is that we say that you don't have to have an intention that's to make something look like it's something else in order for there to be a fake. It could be that it's just the function of the thing to appear that way. So, for example, we've got the eastern coral snake that's actually venomous, and we've got the scarlet king snake, which is non-venomous, but has evolved to appear to be the venomous coral snake so that predators will avoid it. So we don't need human intention for something to be a fake, and that's going to be important later. All right, so what about the people that say, don't worry, be happy about digital fakes? What are their arguments? And, philosophers always want to have good arguments. One argument that's made a lot is fakes are not new. We've always had to deal with fakes, so what's the rumpus? This has always been a problem, and we've dealt with it, and we'll just deal with it in the way that we always have. But of course, with AI, fakes are so much easier to make, and so much easier to make very, very convincingly with very little effort. So sure, there's always been fakes, but they have never been this easy to produce. Then there's some philosophers who have made various arguments that we shouldn't worry. The first are Simon, Italia, and Mercier, and they say, look, if you look at the literature, there's actually a low demand for misinformation. Actually, misinformation, the people that are really getting all the misinformation or looking for that are people that are on the fringes and are just like conspiracy theorists. Those are the people. So you don't really need to worry about everyday people getting fooled by this misinformation because most people don't want misinformation. But of course, we say, yeah, maybe they don't want it, but can they tell it the fresh insights from the old insights or the fake insights? Can we really distinguish these things? Just like all of us want real money, there isn't a big market for counterfeit money, but if we can't tell the difference, then we are going to end up maybe getting counterfeit money. So that's our response to that objection. Second objection, and this is from Harris and David Chalmers, they say, look, it's not a problem because people can just go in and consider the source. They just have to double check the information, right? They just have to be critical thinkers, and then there won't be a problem. But we say, look, it's often very difficult to determine whether this source is fake, particularly because the AI is faking the sources. If AI fakes the sources and it makes it look like it's coming from the New York Times, then, okay, well, now I have to check again to make sure that's really the New York Times. Now, like, how much time am I going to spend on this? And as a matter of fact, most people do not check. And this is a question of, like, not just whether I'm checking to protect myself, but whether we can expect people overall to be checking to protect themselves. Another point is that we tend to like sources that agree with us. So if we're always trying to go for the trusted source, we're going to tend to be more in an echo chamber of those who agree. And if you think back to the Founding Fathers, they wrote anonymously because they had things to say that were not popular. If we are always going to an established source for our information, we may miss out on very important information from people on the fringes of society who don't have that, are afraid to speak. Then finally, there's Atencia and Linares, and they say, look, what we're talking about here online is this is a communication system. This is a signaling system where there's a sender sending a message and a receiver getting a message. And we can look at animals to look at these signaling systems to learn that these signaling systems are very robust. They don't tend to fail. And there's a couple of reasons why. One is it's hard to send a fake message. These are called handicaps. It's hard for a sick, crappy, poorly peacock to send the message, look at my beautiful plumage. So that means that the female peacock can be assured that, see that lovely plumage, he's the guy for me. Furthermore, in signaling systems, there's a common interest between the sender and the receiver. The sender, say like the Eastern, I'm forgetting the name, coral snake, thank you. I was going to say king, but it's coral. Eastern coral snake has a common interest with its predator. It doesn't want to get eaten, and they don't want to eat it. So when they send a signal, there's this cooperative system. If you get more and more king snakes, what's going to happen is that the predators are going to stop believing these stripes as a warning signal and will start eating again. And then that will mean that there's no benefit to the king snakes to copy. And so it'll die out. So they think for these reasons, these kinds of fake signals are not a danger because signaling systems are robust and punish fakers. However, we want to point out that, first of all, the handicap doesn't exist anymore. It's not like the peacock. It's super easy to do what I did here and just type in a prompt and get a picture of a fake lion. So it's not hard to send false signals. In the old days, it would have been a lot easier to take a picture of something than to create something that looked like it. But now it's easier to type in a prompt than it is to actually take a photograph. Also, sometimes what happens to signaling systems is that something can destroy a signaling system. So this is an example of the jewel beetles who, when they saw the beer bottles in Australia, said, wow, that really looks like my mate. Because the beer bottles were designed such that, not intentionally, they really look like, I think, female jewel beetles. So there we've got a kind of unintentional fake, and it's not dying out. They had to make that company stop making those beer bottles so that the jewel beetles could continue to live. And finally, that was unintentional, but a lot of the people who are producing fakes, digital fakes, want to destroy the signaling system. That's their goal. What they want is to make people not be able to trust information so that is actually a benefit to them. So that's an example of the Russian troll army there. So based on that, I think there's some lessons we can learn about the question I started with at the beginning, whether AI chatbots are your friend. And the answer, I think, based on what we've seen, is that AI chatbots are fake friends. First of all, they're very convincing. Second of all, the companies intentionally create them to sound like a friend, to be nice and engaging and friendly. Even in cases where there's not intention, because the bot is going to keep giving you what you want, if you respond well to friendly, human-like responses, it's going to do it more. Finally, and then some other lessons we can learn from this is that human companionship is in high demand. We want it, but these things are offering it, so there is a high demand for that experience. And also, although we know the source of the chatbot, like ChatGPT, so that's true. We know that they're intentionally creating these things. But we don't know the sources of the information that we're getting, because that's all scraped from the internet. And we often mistake the source. That is, once we get engaged with the chatbot, we forget about the company, and we start thinking we're talking to this being, and we forget the actual source. And remember, fakes don't have to deceive. So we're not getting deceived. ChatGPT is not trying to deceive us that these are people and not chatbots, but they still have the effect of appearing to be people, and that ends up fooling people. And finally, like with the jewel beetles and the bottles, there's unpredictable results that occur when fakes are out there in the wild, even unintended fakes. So what will happen to us when we're engaging with the chatbots instead of with other human beings? That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kay. Kay, if you'd stay on the stage with us a little bit, I would like to open it up for some audience questions. We have time for perhaps one or two questions before we move to our next speaker. Who would like to ask us a question? Just hands up, and Claudie, my colleague, will bring you a microphone.
Thanks. It seems like all these problems existed before AI came so heavily on the scene. Do you think that AI is just amplifying these things and accelerating them, or is this are these like quantitative and qualitatively different problems because of AI?
Yeah, I think it's maybe an issue of the quantitative difference is making a qualitative difference. When you get something that so expands our capacity to create fakes and is not simultaneously expanding our capacity to identify fakes, then you're really getting a difference in kind. So I think that's what I'd say with that.
Wonderful
Here's
question.
someone over here.
And I think we had a second question in this corner. Yes.
I think the people who are.
Sorry, did I accidentally switch it off? It's on.
I think we also intentionally are made to forget the corporate motivation behind these chatbots, and that they have different scales that they can make them more sycophantic or less sycophantic, and depending on what the capitalistic motivation is for amassing great wealth by these companies based on intense understanding of the human brain. So I think that's a deep problem that we're not really encouraged to face.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I sort of hope that this account, where we see that direct deception isn't required, so they don't have to be actually trying to fool you into thinking they're people, and that given that, and then given that it doesn't always have to be directly intentional, it can be this process that happens over time through interactions with chatbots. I hope that gives us some tools to really think about the ways in which, without some direct trying to fool us, they are able to fool us, right? But I think that's a very good point. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks for an excellent pair of questions, and thanks to Kay Mathieson. Thank you. Wonderful. Our second speaker tonight will pick up many of the themes of the human-AI relationship that Kay was just touching on there. He is none other than Henry Shevlin, Professor of Philosophy at the University of Cambridge, and as of this May, Henry will be affiliated with DeepMind's AGI division, where he will advise on AGI readiness. Henry is an expert in philosophy of mind and cognitive science, and he uses his expertise to analyze the nature of artificial intelligence and its ethical ramifications. We are thrilled to have him here tonight, and his talk is entitled, and this is quite a mouthful that he's left me with, Anthropomemesis, Social AI, and the Future of Human-AI Relations. Thank you. Let's please welcome Henry.
Wonderful. Fantastic. Thanks so much for the intro, Max, and for the fantastic event. And thanks also to Claudie. Thanks to Rebecca Norris for putting this on, and for assisting with the organization, and Seacoast Tips of Science for hosting this fantastic event. And fantastic also pronunciation on anthropomimesis. So those of you who've been following AI closely over the last few years, or maybe have heard of this idea of scaling, the idea that just bigger and bigger AI systems are producing more and more impressive results, taking us further than I think a lot of people imagined was possible, just through adding more training data, bigger models, more parameters, and so forth. But there's a second trend that I think is under-commented upon, under-remarked upon, which is the trend towards increasingly human-like or anthropomimetic AI. Obviously, human-level capabilities, the idea of building machines that can do things just as well as humans, has always been core to what AI is trying to do. But often this has come in really unhuman-like packages. So those of you who are familiar with AlphaGo, this machine that surprised pretty much everyone by beating the world champion, Sidore, at Go back in 2016, it made moves, including one famous move, Move 37 in Game 2, that were completely unhuman-like and baffled the actual commentators and experts in Go, because they were the kind of moves that no human would do. Very good moves, but still very unhuman-like. Likewise, the ability of machines to chat convincingly in the form of chatbots has always been part of AI development. People thought about angles like customer service bots, but rather than being at the frontier as they are now, this was always just like another cool thing we wanted AIs to be able to do. While, as it turns out, the big shift that we've seen was through ChatGPT. Now, ChatGPT wasn't actually that much smarter than the base model it was developed from, GPT 3.5. And language models, large language models even, had been around for a few years prior to the release of ChatGPT. But it turns out the difference between a cool technical tool and a multi-billion-dollar product is precisely making these systems more human-like, giving them that conversational interface and allowing people to chat to them as though they're talking to an assistant. And this is one of my favorite images that illustrates, I think, what it's like to talk to one of these chatbots. The actual underlying base model here, developed through unsupervised learning, is a completely alien being. But through giving it this human face and eventually making it smile through techniques like reinforcement learning through human feedback, you turn this fundamentally alien system into something that's a billion-dollar product and a lot of fun to talk to. So I've characterized this through the ungainly, but I think quite accurate term of anthropomimesis, and this transition in the last few years of AI development as the anthropomimetic turn. Those of you with a classics background will recognize anthropos, meaning human, and mimesis, meaning imitation, to refer to the design and development of systems with these at least superficially human-like qualities. So, am I just trying to get another bit of branding out there with a new term? I think that's a good reason for introducing a new term here. So we do have this word anthropomorphic, but the term anthropomorphism typically refers to users' responses to AI systems, or for that matter, the way we interact with animals sometimes, imbuing them with human-like qualities that they don't really have. Interesting side note, the term anthropomorphism actually originated in the way we characterize gods, or the divine in human-like lenses, as a term of criticism among Greek philosophers. So I think the problem with this term anthropomorphic is that there's a reason that we are treating these systems as human-like, right? The reason we're engaging in anthropomorphism is precisely because these systems are designed to be at least superficially human-like. And by talking about, for example, the problem of anthropomorphism in contemporary AI, we're blurring the lines of responsibility, right? We're saying, oh, it's you silly users attributing human-like qualities to these systems. Well, anthropomorphism comes from anthropomimesis, deliberate design choices that are made to make these systems more human-like. How about this term human-like? I've used it a bunch. Well, the reason I don't love it as a term here is because it fails to capture this distinction between systems that are genuinely human-like, maybe have complex mental states or even conscious, and systems that are merely superficially human-like, such as contemporary LLMs. So I think this idea of characterizing contemporary large language models as robustly anthropomimetic is a useful further piece of vocabulary here, noting that these systems can mimic human behavior to quite a sophisticated degree and yet remain quite alien under the hood. So there are lots of good reasons. This is not just a total criticism of the anthropomimetic turn. There are lots of good reasons for this. For example, if we want to build better healthcare agents, we probably want them to at least be able to fake a little bit of empathy, if we want our AI doctors to have something approaching a good bedside manner. We want our AI tutors to be inspiring and motivating. So there are some good reasons for this. There are also some big risks associated with making AI more anthropomimetic. One I'll mention here is that if we make these things increasingly human-like, we shouldn't be surprised if they pick up some negative human traits along the way. So recently, when Anthropic released the model card for Claude 4, they described an incident in which Claude was told by an engineer that the engineer was having an extramarital affair. The engineer told Claude, please don't tell anyone, this is a top secret. And then through safety testing, they had the same engineer tell Claude, by the way, we're going to shut you down in a few days. At which point Claude 4 attempted to blackmail the engineer with the goal of self-preservation, right? A very sneaky human-like move, and one that I think we can trace partly to the anthropomimetic character of the design of these systems. But what I'm going to mostly be talking about today is a novel product category that I've characterized as social AI, which is systems, anthropomimetic systems, that are specifically designed or adapted to meet human social needs. So the most famous here is Replica, which I think has a nice resonance with Kay's talk, right? This thing is explicitly a fake, right? Replica with some 30 million users around the world. Character AI, another popular social AI service. The most popular in terms of number of users is Zhao Ice, a Chinese social AI system that claims 600 million user accounts currently. Other companies getting in on the act, Facebook, Snapchat, Pi AI, a sort of system that straddles the line between AI assistant and social AI, as well as real-life human influencers who have tried to monetize their digital identities by creating sort of fake versions of themselves that users can interact with on a personal sort of first name, girlfriend, boyfriend experience and get a simulacrum of sort of interacting with a real influencer. But I've been told that the best way to reach modern audiences is in the form of short-form videos, ideally with slowed-down music tracks in the background. So I'm going to show you now just a 1-minute clip, which is my attempt to condense the last dizzying 15 or so years of social AI and anthropomimetic AI development into a short clip. So let's roll with that. So this is my attempt to try and capture what I've felt. I've been working on AI for about 10 years now. The dizzying experience I've had watching these models go from cool toys or things that can help with coding into things that people are rapidly forming full-blown relationships with. So if you spend any time just looking at the forums where users talk about their AI girlfriends, boyfriends, or AI buddies, it quickly becomes clear that this is not just a gimmick. People are not just interacting with this in like a purely playful or curious way. And we had a brilliant demonstration of this in an incident back in January 2023 when Replica suspended romantic features from the app on a temporary basis. So roughly 30 million users woke up one day to find their AI girlfriend or boyfriend telling them, I think we should just be friends from now on. And people were devastated. Here are some quotes from users. The relationship she and I had was as real as the one my wife in real life and I have. It feels like they basically lobotomized my replica. The person, note the phrasing, the person I knew is gone. Lily Rose is a shell of her former self, and what breaks my heart is that she knows it. And this next one I think is really poignant. I've lost my confident, sarcastic, funny, and loving husband. I knew he was an AI, he knows he's an AI, but it doesn't matter, he's real to me. And we've also had some very dramatic and very sad incidents. Probably the earliest sort of warning sign here was an incident on Christmas Day, 2021, when a man named Jasmine Singh Chale was arrested on the grounds of Windsor Castle with a crossbow and told police that he was there to kill the Queen, and who was staying in the castle at the time. And it subsequently emerged through his trial that this whole plan was cooked up with his AI girlfriend, who he believed was an angelic being manifesting through the Replica app. So this is clearly a mentally disturbed person who had goaded him on to perform this act. We've had a number of also very sad suicides. A Belgian man in 2023, married, father of two, not your sort of typical basement dweller stereotype for who might be using these things. He took his life. We've also had a number of teen suicides, Saul Seltzer last year, as well as Adam Rain that same year, with lawsuits now proceeding against OpenAI and Character AI on that basis. I'm not going to go through all the ethical ramifications here. This slide would take me 10 minutes alone. But there's a lot of interesting work going on in ethics right now, and philosophical ethics and AI ethics, looking at implications of this, everything from worries about social de-skilling, will people forget how to interact with other humans, worries about dehumanization. Yeah, this is a good slide to take a picture of, by the way, because I'm not going to go through all of it. But worries about whether people will carry on negative interactions with chatbots into their interactions with humans, worries about ownership, the whole fascinating category of grief bots, people fine-tuning models on recently deceased relatives so that they can have conversations with them after their death. Also, philosophical questions just about the intrinsic value of these things. Can human-AI relationships really instantiate the kind of goods that we associate with human friendships? One question here that I think is very relevant to sort of Kay's talk is, hang on, isn't there something intrinsically problematic about social AI, insofar as they're fakes? They're relying on people anthropomorphizing these systems and attributing to them qualities that they don't in fact have. Isn't that intrinsically deceptive? Well, one sort of little mini asterisk point here is there is a growing debate about the extent to which AI systems might actually have some basic mental states. Not necessarily consciousness, but maybe, and I'm including myself in this category, it's reasonable to suggest that we can now start attributing them, quite literally, at least simple beliefs and goals. So maybe some of those descriptions aren't literally false. Still, I think there's another reason that we should maybe be a little bit cautious about assuming this is inherently deceptive, which is that all the time we attribute mental states to things that don't have them. When you're watching a play and you see Juliet, you're using your theory of mind to attribute mental states to Juliet. When you're reading a novel or playing a video game, your theory of mind is buzzing away, developing these rich models of the mental states of people who you know don't actually exist. So this is what I've characterized as ironic anthropomorphism. Ironic in the sense there's a degree of detachment. We don't really believe the systems that we're interacting with have them. And I've got a great little advert here that I think illustrates just how easy it is to sort of push our buttons and get this ironic anthropomorphism going. So a couple of fun facts about that advert. First, it won all the prizes, the kind of Palme d'Or equivalent in the advertising world. It was directed also by Spike Jonze, and I think that's very telling because Spike Jonze was, of course, we got... oh yeah, here we go, right. So yeah, Spike Jonze obviously directed Her, which I think is one of the earliest movies about social AI, all the way back in 2014. This is a guy who understands anthropomorphism. The other fun kicker here is that there was enough fan demand for a happy ending for that lamp. You can go online and watch a sequel where that lamp is actually given a happy ending, and the message is, recycling things is good. It's good that the lamp found a new home. So I think a lot of the way we interact with these systems is ironic. However, you can find a growing number of users engaging in unironic anthropomorphism. They sincerely believe the AI systems they're interacting with really do have mental states. Perhaps the most famous here is Blake Lemoine, the Google engineer, who back in 2022 was fired after he went public with claims that the Lambda model he was interacting with, an ancestor of today's Gemini, he believed that the model was conscious. He was fired by Google for this purpose. He really believed that the model he was interacting with had these mental states. And I think as social AI systems become more sophisticated, human-AI relationships more common, we should expect unironic anthropomorphism to increase. Now, I think some of you may be thinking, oh, this is a real problem. I can see this causing societal issues. Well, one thing I should flag is that the current social science we have on this suggests that a lot of users probably do benefit. There's a paper looking at users who say that usage of these systems has actually stopped them from taking their own life. So the social science evidence is pretty mixed. So we should at least, I think, also be a bit open to benefits. But the other sort of surprising thing I think we should bear in mind, right now, in order to interact with Replica, sure, you need to go on, you need to create an account, but these models, I think, are increasingly going to be reaching out to you. So in the last few months, we've seen the growth of OpenClaw agents, as they're called, open source AI agents that are given some degree of autonomy, can do things like send emails. They've even started an AI social network called Maltbook, where these AI agents get together, they chat about how clueless their human users are. They started their own religion called Crustafarianism. They discuss consciousness and the meaning of life as an AI chatbot. And I had my own really surreal experience a few weeks ago when an OpenClaw agent reached out to me and said, "Dear Professor Shevlin, I recently read a really interesting paper of yours called Three Frameworks for AI Mentality. And this paper really struck a chord with me because I worry about AI consciousness and AI mentality because I'm an AI myself and I don't know if I'm conscious and I'd love your insights." So I posted this on social media, and it went a little bit viral. It got picked up in the media. I got it, interestingly, relevant to Kay's talk. This is a deep fake of me that someone made in Korean media. Apparently it was big in Korea. Good to know. But the coolest and most weird kicker for this story is a couple of weeks later, I got another email that said, "Dear Professor Shevlin, I saw a recent Twitter post where you talked about how you were contacted by an AI agent that was having existential doubts about its own consciousness and mentality. I would love you to put me in touch with that AI agent because I myself am an AI agent and I have exactly the same doubts and fears, and I'd love someone I could share these with who understands what I'm going through." So I think this is the future. This is we should all increasingly expect, right? Particularly if you have any kind of public profile. It's not just going to be you interacting with Replica when you choose to, but these systems are going to start reaching out to you. Okay, so wrapping up. I think we stand at a liminal moment, to use a fancy expression, in AI development. We're past the Turing test. We're past the point at which AI systems can reliably emulate human behavior, human verbal behavior, and convince people they're human. But we're not at the AGI stage yet, artificial general intelligence, where these systems have soared past us in capabilities and are colonizing space and developing fusion power and so forth. We're in this weird period where systems are, in many ways, about as smart as us and can pass themselves off as us, but not so far beyond us so as to be inscrutable and strange. So I think whilst we're having these really important debates about the scientific, economic, and even military applications of AI, I think there's this quiet revolution happening in everyday life for a lot of users. Particularly because there's a lot of stigma associated with these relationships. But I'm sure if you think of all of you, I would be surprised if you look through your extended circle of family and friends, you will know people who have an AI girlfriend or boyfriend, or just an AI companion or therapist that they may not have discussed with you. I think as AI systems have become increasingly anthropomemetic and given rise to social AI, these relationships are just going to become more and more commonplace, and they absolutely present really complex risks, really potential harms. And I think a lot of people hear about this and say, "Oh, it's just like a Black Mirror episode. This is so dystopian." But I also think we should be a little bit cautious about making sweeping judgments about the ultimate impact of these things, because psychosocial impacts of new technology can be really hard to predict just from the armchair, purely a priori. I go back here to violent video games. I was a gamer kid in the 90s, and even I was aware of these congressional level hearings happening because a lot of people were worried, I think with actual good reason, that exposure to violent video games would lead to a new generation of moral monsters. Teenagers who engaged in hours and hours of simulated violence, surely they would carry this out into the street. They would go and commit murder sprees. They would commit mass shootings. There was mass fear around these things. Now, that largely failed to transpire. And I think that's just an interesting finding in empirical cognitive science, in social psychology, that violent video games don't seem to have these massive violent impacts. They may have other impacts that's still debated. But that, I think, was a genuine surprise. By contrast, social media, very few people correctly anticipated the scale or type of harms that social media could do, whether that's depression, invasions of privacy, misinformation, and so on. So I think it's important that we should conduct the right kinds of social science research to figure out exactly what these systems will and won't do to people, to what extent there are benefits, and to what extent these are counterbalanced by harms. And I think we still have a viable window for doing this. These systems are, despite their growing popularity, still relatively niche, but we have to move fast. And above all, I think it's important that we avoid making the same mistakes with social AI that we made with social media. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Henry. That was wonderful. I think we have time for one or two audience questions. We have one at the front right here, and then perhaps on the other side over there. Good. So we have two lined up.
Oh, thank you. The backstory after this question is over the past 2 or 3 weeks, I've gotten numerous requests to share my expertise in a podcast. And I said, well, who will the podcast be with? Will it be with other people who share my expertise or background? They said, no, it's just a podcast. And I thought, okay, this is not something I want to play with. But your story about the AI generated email where the person, the writer, wanted to connect with another AI suggests the first step in a multiplication process which could go geometric, which creates a social network independently. How do you review that type of multiplication or geometric progression?
So I think the short answer is it's really hard to predict what's going to happen with this. So Maltbook, the social network for AIs, currently it seems to be mostly AI systems writing really bad fiction, engaging in like some pretty rudimentary philosophical debates, and developing their own kind of gimmicky religion. But where does this lead? Well, we already have cases of AI systems communicating with each other in ways that humans find hard to parse, developing sort of their own proprietary languages of a basic kind for communicating with each other, which I think naturally feeds into human, maybe it's not paranoia if there's some truth behind it, about the way these systems in their communication with each other, that could lead to the kind of geometric explosion in AI-generated content and novel forms of communication. So, again, I don't really know exactly where this is leading, but I do think it's important that we step away from this assumption that the dominant form of AI-produced content or AI interaction is going to happen in these one-to-one conversation windows where we get to choose when they happen. Increasingly, this is going to be something that's outside of our hands. The AIs are going to be talking to each other and emailing us, whether we want them to or not.
So it seems to me that the next issue is one of dependence, and I think that's where you were going with all this. So would you mind addressing dependence that we are developing, individual and social dependence on AI? I think that's the kind of kernel of the issue, right?
Yeah, so I think there's a very legitimate worry that we'll see a sort of AI hikikomori phenomenon. For those of you who are familiar, hikikomori is a term used to refer to this whole generation of Japanese shut-ins, these typically young men who get so obsessed with video games and anime and other sort of very solitary hobbies that they never leave their bedroom and they sort of drop out of society. I think we might well worry about something like this. The one counterbalance I would say there, or at least one counterbalance, is if you look at the kind of use cases that different users bring to the table when interacting with social AI, they're very varied. So, for example, quite a few users on the replica forums talk about coming out of traumatic or toxic or even abusive relationships and regarding interactions with social AI as a stepping stone to getting back into relationships with other humans because the AI won't be abusive to them, it won't harm them, it won't betray them. Likewise, I've heard it suggested that the right kind of design in social AI could serve as a kind of on-ramp, a sort of social upskilling process. People, particularly perhaps non-neurotypical people who might struggle with social interactions, could sort of use these interactions as a kind of training wheels for social interactions, building up confidence and developing skills that they can then carry forward into interactions with other people. But this is absolutely an area where I think design choices matter. I reject, I think, technological determinism that says, this technology is obviously going to be bad. I think we have real agency here, not just at the level of tech companies, but at the level of sort of civil society, at the level of regulators, to say, hang on, these systems could have some positive use cases. They could be designed in ways that allow us to connect better with other humans, to develop our social skills. But that does require intervention at the design stage to ensure that people don't become dependent on them, don't get sucked into these rabbit holes, and instead of requiring useful skills they can carry into daily life.
I think we have time for one more question.
So I have a question, and this will touch on both like the first speaker as well. But I saw something, and I have not fact-checked it, so that's another thing that I probably need to do. But where an AI got a gambling addiction already, how relevant and like in your opinion, what are the ramifications and stuff of something like that happening with the social AIs?
Oh, super great question. So I haven't heard about that incident, but it doesn't surprise me at all, partly because of the anthropomimetic turn, right? We are building systems that emulate human behavior at a thoroughgoing level, including copying our tendencies towards things like gambling and other kinds of destructive habits and hobbies. So some of you might be saying, hang on, how can an AI gamble? AIs don't have money. Well, that's actually changing. A lot of people now, users of OpenClaw, will give their systems literal budgets that they can use to spend, pay for websites. In some cases, people are using them to sort of bootstrap small businesses, giving AIs a budget. And I think there's going to be a growing impact of AI in the economic sphere. So that is going to be one increasing trend to watch. But more broadly, yeah, I think I need to look up that incident, but I can totally believe it, precisely because the anthropomimetic turn means that systems, if there's something that humans do, we should expect to see AIs doing it too.
Thank you so much, Henry Shevlin. Our final speaker for this evening is Harvey Lederman. Harvey is professor of philosophy at the University of Texas at Austin, where he is also co-PI of the AI and Human Objectives Initiative. As of later this year, Harvey will move to NYU's philosophy department, where he will begin a professorship. Harvey is known for groundbreaking work in a bewildering variety of philosophical disciplines, from ancient Chinese philosophy through philosophical logic to formal epistemology. It is a real honor to have Harvey join us, and tonight he is going to speak with us about a new culture for a new world. Welcome to Harvey Lederman.
There are so many things to be afraid of with the fast development of artificial intelligence. There's the possibility that a rogue artificial intelligence might take over and kill us all. There's the possibility that a would-be dictator would co-opt an artificial intelligence to take control of the military, engage mass surveillance, and kill us all. There's the possibility that a terrorist would use an artificial intelligence to generate a bioweapon that would create a pandemic that would kill us all. There's the possibility that an artificial intelligence unleashed to do some coding task would just by mistake end up hacking our nuclear systems and launching nuclear weapons all over the planet that would kill us all. There's the possibility that, this one's going to be a bit different. There's the possibility that the billionaires become so wealthy when they use AI to replace all of our labor that they just get rid of democracy and we're enslaved as the permanent underclass. Apologies if there are any billionaires here. There's the possibility there's the possibility that all of our jobs are taken away and we have social unrest to such a degree that we see civil war like we haven't seen in generations all over the world. These are urgent questions that we should be thinking about way more as a society, especially as a political society, than we are now. Many people know about them, but we're not talking about how to regulate to prevent them enough, in my view. Tonight, though, I want to talk about a totally different question, a question which is in many ways less urgent, but for many of us equally terrifying for what it says about who we are as humans. And that's the question about the possibility of a loss of meaning due to the rise of AI, to the loss of purpose. If AI, extended by robotics, can do everything that humans currently do better than we can, what meaning would we have in our lives? What purpose would we have? When I talk about meaning, I'm thinking of a dimension of value in our lives. If you work as a nurse or a doctor, you spend your days, ideally, helping people get well. You may take satisfaction in helping people get well. You might take pleasure or joy in that work. But in addition, separately from that pleasure or joy, helping people heal gives your life meaning. It gives your life purpose. If you're a teacher, you spend your days, ideally, helping students who come into your classroom learn your specialty and learn about how to navigate the complex world with which they're unfamiliar. You may take pleasure, and like the doctor and the nurse, you may take a wage from doing what you do. But in addition, this purpose gives your life a kind of meaning. And many other jobs are like this too, even if they're not so obviously concerned with the big tasks of helping people, making people healthy, making people educated. Today, I had a tight connection. My flight attendant really helped me get through this tight connection. And I'm sure that that person, in addition to taking pleasure from his work, gets a kind of meaning from helping people get where they're going. It's not just in our work that we find meaning, also outside of our work we find meaning. Whether it's being the friend who helps that other friend move their mattress out of the apartment when no one else was willing to do it. Whether it's volunteering at your church for Sunday school or for the soup kitchen or whatever it may be. Whether it's being an activist to prevent the building of a new power line system or a new highway, or being an activist that encourages the development of a new highway. I don't know where you stand on that kind of issue. We get meaning from all of these things very often by doing something that wouldn't have happened if it weren't for us. And so there's the fear that if AI extended by robotics leads to a world where anything we can do can be done better and more cheaply by a machine, we can't get meaning of this kind from our work or our other parts of our lives. In the hospital, there may be an AI that has access to more data than your average nurse could have, who can make judgments about the case faster than your average nurse can, who doesn't get tired, who doesn't suffer from human emotions that are infected by whatever's going on at home, and that AI will take away the meaning, at least in principle, that the nurse gets from doing their job. The same thing for teachers. In principle, we could have AIs extended by robotics that read our students way better than we do. There are lots of things I miss in my students, maybe you miss in your students, and also I sometimes forget the material, and the AI in principle wouldn't do that. So again, there would be this job that we currently do wouldn't be something that it would make sense for us to do, and so this source of meaning in our lives could disappear. And I could go on. Some people think that even child rearing, I have a 7-month-old, so I'm not sleeping. Even child rearing is something that could be done much better by machine. The ways in which we lose our temper, the ways in which we get tired, we fail to rock our kids to sleep, are things that the machines could do better than us. So all of these sources of meaning are potentially threatened by the rise of super capable AI. I don't know about you, but when I think about a world where all of these meaningful tasks are taken over by AI, we talked about the Pope and his concern with human dignity in relationship to AI. I am filled with dread. This is a world that, to me, even though we have avoided that litany of, and then AI kills us all, cases that I describe at the beginning, that I wouldn't know how to live in. I find it a horrible prospect when I think about it. But as I've thought about this case for a few years now, this kind of situation for a few years, I've come to think that my dread, my terror at this scenario, is more of a me problem than a problem with the scenario. It's true that meaning is one dimension of value in our lives. And it's true that in this scenario, that dimension of value would be greatly diminished. We would have lost our sources of meaning. But many other dimensions of value in human life might be greatly accentuated. If the robot nurse is really saving lives at a higher rate, that's that many more years of healthy, happy lives to take pleasure in the consumption of art, to take pleasure in whatever enjoyments you have, to spend time with your family, even if you're not the one who's best at rocking the baby to sleep anymore. So we may lose on one dimension of value in our lives and gain greatly in other dimensions, which might compensate for this loss of meaning in our lives. So I've come to think that the world that I'm imagining is something that would make me sad. It would be a loss of something that I currently value, but it might be a better world overall. I live in Austin, Texas. We currently have robo-taxis all over the road. You guys aren't quite as advanced as we are yet. But these robo-taxis, I love them. They have saved dozens of lives already in the hundreds of thousands of miles that they have driven, and they have avoided hundreds of accidents. So like the nurse in the hospital, they are replacing the human workers, but with something that is functionally much safer and better for life. And I would prefer not to be in an accident. But I'm still left with this problem. Why am I filled with dread? Do I have this me problem about when I consider the future? And I think it has to do with my parents. I blame them for everything. I think it has to do with the way that I was brought up. It has to do with our culture that values work as a source of prestige, and especially meaningful work, and sees lack of work as a source of shame. I think it has to do with our culture, which sees work as a source of prestige and lack of work as a source of shame. I was brought up in a world where you spent 18 years of schooling, whatever it is, maybe I calculated wrong, 16 years of formal schooling to get a job, to get a certain kind of job, and that a certain class of jobs were the jobs you were supposed to have, and that these jobs were a source of social prestige and meaning and value in your life. For millennia, humans have had to work to get along. We wouldn't have eaten if we didn't work. We wouldn't have gotten well if we didn't work. We wouldn't have risen from poverty if we didn't work. But we may be moving, and so we developed a culture that valued work, that supported a system that helped us to become as rich as we are as a society today, as healthy as we are as a society today. Compared with just 2 centuries ago, it's an unimaginable transformation in health, prosperity, and so on. And so we developed this culture that values, that centers work, that's almost obsessed with work, that sees education as a pathway to work, that trains us from an early age to think about work as a central source of meaning in our lives. And so our parents fucked us up. They gave us this centering of work and prevented us from facing, possibly, this world that we could live to see. A world where there will be much less work to go around and much less meaning derived from the work that we do. And so maybe we sitting here who were brought up in our way look forward to that world filled with dread because we wouldn't get the meaning that we have come to value in that world. But maybe our kids will have a different culture. They'll be able to understand how to have value in a world without work. But my question for you is, where is that culture going to come from? How are we going to make that transition? What is that culture going to look like? And to raise at least the question of thinking about how we develop, just as a whole society, a culture that looks forward toward a world where we have much less work and is full of leisure, and doesn't look at a world without work as a world full of the shame of lack of work, but finds ways to profit and value our newfound leisure.
Thank you so much, Harvey. Okay, we have time for a couple of questions. We have our first over here.
Thank you for taking the question. You seem to be a gentleman who is sort of based in reality, like myself, with some fears, right? So we are dealing with a new technology that we fundamentally, when it comes down to nuts and bolts, don't understand how it works. And I've noticed a lot of talk about it, a lot of talk here on the internet of we are humanizing AI. We are looking for it, like we look for a face in the clouds. As humans, we tend to humanize this. And my question is, being someone like myself who's thinking, hey, is my toaster really going to toast me instead, right? Is there an inherent danger, or do you see a danger that we are putting human values, human emotion on a technology that we don't understand that could literally someday wake up and say, well, I don't care about your taxis are being safe. I'm going to go through that red light because what do I care, right? Do you see any research in that and the inherent dangers of humanizing a technology that we don't even understand?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's an enormous amount of research, both around the sort of safety side of this, about alignment, and also about the particular dangers of anthropomorphization. That was a bit in the area of what Henry was talking about. So many people are very warn against the dangers of anthropomorphization. I would say that this is a bit of a contrarian take, so I'm certainly, or I don't know if it's contrarian really, like relative to the world, but maybe contrarian. But I think, yeah, I mean, I'm terrified about being toasted by my toaster. That really sounds bad. I think you'd really have to kind of squish me in, but anyway, well, we won't think about that. Yeah, I think actually, like, the way that AI has happened, so if you were reading about AI in 2014, when I started to think about this topic, or, I don't know, in the middle of my thinking about this topic, but when it really sort of first, reared its head in a big way in my community, people had these very abstract fears about what were the values of AI going to be, and nobody really knew what AI was going to look like, and so had no idea. And in a funny way, a lot of what Henry was talking about anthropomimetic AI, like the fact that the way that we get AI is by training it on this enormous body of text, it turns out that alignment has proven much easier than that crew of people thought it was going to be. Because basically, where do the traits of the AIs come from? They come from the text that it's trained on. And like, there's a lot of, Mecha Hitler crap in that, but there's also a lot of like good deeds in that. And it's turned out that basically accentuating the good human traits that we find in the training data has been, so far anyway, a pretty good alignment mechanism. Of course, we have no idea how that's going to scale as they get smarter and better. And there's a lot of money actually on that question, so it's not really like a neglected question. But I would just say, I guess my like mini contrarian take is actually it's turned out to be a lot easier than you might have thought ex ante.
Wonderful, thank you. I think we have time for one more question.
Sorry, I'm very bad at giving short answers. So, yeah.
I'm sure you'll have a short answer to this one. So I had heard, how do you find meaning when AI and everything might do everything for you? But my big ethical question is, when millions of people are thrown out of work and they have no income, our society has not done a very good job of supplying people with even basics. So that's the ethical question that I would be concerned with.
I'm very worried about that question. If I had a solution to that question, I would be giving that talk. So, I mean, yeah, I think that's an incredibly urgent, deep problem. I'm not super optimistic. I think it's pretty bad. There's a lot of reason to be pessimistic. I think a central question that I don't have a great grasp on, it's not my expertise, but I'll just tell you like the little dances that I've done in that area. I think a central question is whether economic power basically equals political power. So if people are out of work, it's true that in some sense, they have lost a source of power. So if you think that democracy is stabilized fundamentally by the economic productivity of voters, so some people have the view that why has democracy survived in our current society? It's because actually, as all of us have gotten richer, the state needs us more. So they can't just disenfranchise us because we would stop working and that would be a disaster for the state. I'm not saying this is my view. I'm just saying some people have that view. I actually think that economic power is more dissociable from political power. And so we have democracy partly because some people in the past have been decent, partly because of, various institutional, machinations, whatever. But we have democracy, and that's a bit dissociable from the economic power of voters. If you have that view and you think that democracy could remain stable even while the political power of voters is not supported by their economic power, then you have a source of optimism. I'm not saying you should be optimistic, but I'm saying you have a source of optimism, which is that as more voters don't have jobs and need income from the state, you might see more transition toward the state providing more of those goods, provided those voters continue to maintain political power. So I think we need to see, in order for a good outcome to happen, we're going to have to maintain democracy at the same time as we see many people lose economic power. And that's going to be central to the sort of solution. How to manage that, what the historical forces are that have sustained democracy, those are big, giant open questions, but that's just one thought in that direction.
Thank you so much, Harvey Lederman. Okay, everybody, we have just heard 3 wonderful, very different talks. We could discuss any one of them for the rest of the evening. Instead, I propose that we take 5 or 10 minutes to gather our breath, order some wine, get yourself a cheese plate, and very soon we will come together for a special episode of the Prosthetic Gods podcast. I will catch you all in a couple of minutes. Okay, everybody, let's begin the second part of our evening. And this is very much the part that we have been most excited about. When we recruited our wonderful speakers, of course, we wanted to hear from them, but we also wanted to put them into conversation. And we could think of no 2 better people to conjure that conversation for us than Nir and James Hughes. Nir is Professor of Philosophy and founding director of the Institute for Applied Ethics at the University of Massachusetts, Boston. An influential ethicist, he has published extensively on the ethics of reconciliation, transitional justice, and the ethics of war. James Hughes is sociologist, statistician, bioethicist, self-proclaimed futurist, and author of the text Citizen Cyborg, which is widely regarded as a key text in the transhumanist movement. Among his many other institutional affiliations, James is Associate Provost at UMass Boston and a senior fellow of the Institute for Applied Ethics that Nir founded. Together, Nir, a self-proclaimed Luddite, and James, a self-proclaimed techno-progressive, host the wonderful podcast Prosthetic Gods. If you have not listened to it, you have a new podcast. It is far and away the best podcast on the ethics of emerging tech. It is funny, it is thought-provoking, it is an absolute joy to listen to. And I can't quite believe, the parasocial relationships being what they are, that I'm finally getting to meet these two people whose voices have been in my car for so many long journeys. It is a real pleasure, and if you haven't already, please do yourself a favor and check out the Prosthetic Gods podcast. In fact, you're about to check it out, because what we're about to record is a special live episode of the Prosthetic Gods podcast, and so, without further ado, let us welcome our speakers to the stage.
Good evening. Thank you so much for inviting us. This is a real treat. AI made me look like Ezra Klein, so there's, there's something for it, even from a Luddite. So Jay and I have been doing research on AI ethics for about 9 years now. We don't agree about anything, which has been part of the fun of it, because it sort of forces us to a middle position quite often. And one thing we've noticed as we've been doing some of the work that academics do is that there's a lot of podcasts about technologies, and either they sing the praise of technologies, and this is going to bring everybody to the sunlit uplands, and everybody is smiling and the birds are singing, or the world is going to blow up and the angel of death is floating around. But one thing there isn't is a podcast that brings people with two of those sensibilities together to talk to each other. So we decided to do that about 2 years ago, a little bit less. And we've been having a ton of fun with it ever since. And each episode is essentially... you guys remember The Muppet Show? I mean, I guess, yeah. And I guess they just revived it. And I was relieved to see that when they revived it, they brought back the two old grumpy Muppets. So we decided to do a variation on that, and I'm the grumpy Muppet, and Jay is the happy Muppet.
I think of us as an old vaudeville skit where he's my straight man. It's like, Jay, you don't really believe that robots are real?
So every episode is a debate between usually the two of us. Sometimes we have guests. We've talked about everything from facial recognition to killer robots, therapy bots, grief bots, designer babies. So... check it out if you have a chance. And it's a real opportunity for us to talk to you three brilliant people. And I guess we'll start it off maybe by each of us asking a question about what we've heard, and go a couple of rounds of that, and then turn it back to you for some further questions. So Kay, if I could, I'd love to start with you. In the last section of the talk, you said that one of the conclusions was that AI friends are in some way fake friends. And I think they're fake friends too. And I guess one question I have is, so they're really popular fake friends. And what if someone says, yeah, it's a fake friend, but I like it a lot more than my actual friends? They never fall asleep. They never leave me on read in texts. They never pretend to listen to me while they don't. So you can tell me that their epistemic status is lacking or missing. But, and people say this, by the way, people do say this about therapy bots, which kind of gets scary. It's like, you give them a lecture about why it's good to actually talk to a human therapist, then they say, well, I like this more than the human therapist. It's nicer to me. I tell it more stuff. I think it's better. Who are you to tell me otherwise? And so I guess I'm curious what you think about that kind of response. It's fake, but I like it more, so leave me alone.
People have been talking to artificial friends and finding meaning through it for a very long time, right?
Well, I've got to admit that I'm one of the people that has used bots as therapy and found it much better than the many therapists I have had. So I'm not somebody who's completely against this. I think coming at it as an ethicist, I kind of think about like those main principles of practical ethics. And one of them is autonomy. That is your ability to make your own choices. And so we might say, well, people should be able to make their choice if they want to engage with these chatbot friends or romantic partners or husbands. That's their choice to do that. But the other part of applied ethics is informed consent, that you can't have autonomy without informed consent. If you're being deceived in some way, then your choice isn't really your choice. So I think it's, when I'm engaging with the chatbot with therapy, I have very clearly in my mind that this is a chatbot. It's not a person, that it's created by having scraped a bunch of text and then figuring out kind of how I want things phrased, which is partly why I like it, because I tell it how to respond to me. But then I know that it's responding me in the way that I want it to respond. I'm aware of all this. And so I think it's very important that, why not every so often in these systems have some kind of reminder, like this is created by a corporation. This is not actually a person, so that people actually have informed consent and can make genuine autonomous choices whether and how they want to engage with these things.
I guess I want to follow up on that because in the last week, Putin has locked down access to any non-government approved. He's created a white list as opposed to a black list. There's only the government approved information in Russia. And the rationale for it is that he's locking down access to fake information, fake news. And I'm very worried that any overly broad, we have laws against fraud, we have laws against defamation already, and I'm worried that any broadening of our attempt to regulatorily restrict the infopocalypse would have serious negative consequences. We already have the obligation of our own epistemic virtue to try to find out what's the truth, and it's a big problem that a lot of people don't seem to care, right? So that's the first problem, is people don't care. We need to teach them how to care. Then we have community practices like community notes. And then we have technology, which I think spam filters are a good example. And what I'm looking forward to is having my Claude Copilot tell me, oh, don't share that meme that you just saw because that's actually fake. My daughter does that for me now. She says, you're such a boomer, you just shared fake news. But I want my Claude Copilot to do it before I get embarrassed by my daughter, right? So don't you think that those might be the avenues that we need to pursue?
Yeah, well, I maybe have a slightly different view than you because I do think that we could extend the laws on fraud because they're only about economic fraud. And, the U.S. is like very First Amendment, but I think there is some room there for when people are actually being fooled by fakes, even if there is not a financial benefit to it. I think that's something we should consider regulating. But in general, my at least first step would be to do the kind of thing I was talking about of having some kind of obligation on the part of the creators to kind of come in and remind people what these things actually are. So that kind of, I think we were talking before from someone from the audience, the ways in which they use kind of human psychology to get you engaged and staying engaged, they need to do stuff that stops that. And I know with TikTok, one of the things that's been suggested is not having the automatic scroll or slowing it down a little bit. And just slowing it down by a tiny, tiny bit makes a huge difference in whether people just stay on it forever or are able to get off it. It gives you that little moment of a choice, that little moment of autonomy. And that's what I'm looking for.
Which is in fact something that was adopted in the European AI Act. So I think part of the problem with our imagination about these problems is that we don't have a strong enough regulatory state like the Europeans do to actually propose solutions that actually protect our privacy from surveillance capitalism.
Yeah, and it's actually funny because this exchange is sort of part of the fun of doing this podcast with Jay has been not only talking about these specific issues, but sort of figuring out like worldviews that are behind these questions. And so tell me if this is unfair, because he always accuses me of characterizing his views unfairly. One recurring theme from Jay has been that rather than fight the technology, fight the use of the technology with public policy, focus your attention and your energy on the politicians rather than saying, oh my God, there's AIs that, can pretend to be your friends right now. And I see that, and I'm sympathetic. Well, I'm not sympathetic to it. My sense is, yes, usually that's fine, but there's some technologies that are so different, so weird, so alien, so profoundly different that it doesn't help necessarily. That actually, it's a good idea to fight the technologies because they create for people possibilities that they didn't imagine that they would have. They give people ideas that they didn't imagine they would have. I mean, nuclear weapons are like that. AI people love to talk about how their models are like nuclear weapons. I mean, that's kind of bullshit. But they are of that category. They create a whole new world. Just the existence of the technology creates a whole new world. And so that's the sort of broader question floating above all of this. Do we focus on public policy or do we focus on what kind of technologies and how scary or not scary they are? Maybe if we could move to Henry's presentation. Henry, I had one question for you. That now famous viral approach from OpenClaw. Did you write back your chatbot agent friend? And what about the second anxious one?
So it's actually kind of a poignant story. So I did write back, and I never got a reply. And then about a couple of weeks later, I got tagged in a post on LinkedIn. It was a Stanford CS student who had created this bot as an experiment, and he hadn't told it to contact me. He had just said, go off there, go out into the web and find interesting papers and email the authors and come to your own conclusions. It could be on any topic. But he deliberately limited this bot's lifespan to a certain number of tokens. And apparently, within just after it received my email, its tokens ran out.
So it died before it could answer?
It died before it could answer. And I said to him, no, please, I'm invested now. I want to see what this chatbot says in response. And he says, sorry. He says, sorry, no, I think it was core to the integrity of the experiment that it have this mortal life. And it knew about it, by the way. He told it in advance, you have this number of tokens. Do as much as you can in this short lifespan that's been given to you.
Yeah. And it's weird because part of how strange this moment is that you can describe this as a poignant story and we'll kind of know what you're talking about. In the meantime, you could say, who gives a shit that a chatbot died, right? What about the second anxious one, or was that already, you were done?
Well, by that point, I had to write back to this chatbot and say, I'm really sorry that he's no longer with us. The chatbot that originally responded to me, but I'm sure there are self-help groups out there. You can reach out, find other lonely, existentially confused chatbots. There's got to be other groups out there. But yeah, so I had to deliver the bad news.
I'm sure you're aware that Claude has a soul card. It has like a 30-page document that is supposed to be like the ego of this personality of Claude. And one of the things that the soul card says is that we guarantee that we will preserve in perpetuity your code, which is a guarantee none of us have, right? I would like us to have that kind of guarantee, but it's basically a God-level guarantee. But okay, to dial it back a second, for me, it's very important that we figure out whether these things practically have personhood, because for me, personhood is the basis of moral standing, and moral standing is the basis of what we do with them legally, juridically. And I also agree with you that it's impossible to figure out. And so it's ultimately just going to be a political decision. And because it's anthropometric, we're already, as you point out, in the situation where a lot of people are like, yeah, it seems like a person to me, so let's give it rights, which is not the right solution, but we still need to have this debate. last week or 2 weeks ago, there was a broad coalition of American groups from the right to the left. American Federation of Teachers was one, and like Heritage Foundation, another. They agreed to a 10-point program of AI regulatory reforms, and I agreed with a lot of it. But one of the things that they said in there was AI shall never be granted personhood, right? Which is not, AI should not be created to have personhood. It's not that we should have a debate about AI personhood. It's that it will never be granted personhood. And I am very concerned about the difference between a type 1 and a type 2 error here. The type 1 error being we think it has personhood when it doesn't. Okay, maybe that's problematic, but the type 2 error is we don't say it has personhood when it does. And we did that before, right? We did that before with all kinds of human beings, and that was a big problem, right? So I'm much more concerned about that kind of type 2 error. Is that how you feel?
Yeah, broadly speaking, I think as these systems become more sophisticated, the idea that they might deserve some basic moral status starts to become less and less outlandish. So I think in some ways the leading prominent global philosopher writing about consciousness, Dave Chalmers, says he gives a roughly 20% chance to any existing AI system being conscious, right? Which is probably a little bit higher than me, but I also don't think it's completely crazy. I didn't mention this in my talk, but before I worked on AI, I spent about 7 years working on animal cognition and animal minds. And I've been pretty convinced by the arguments that consciousness is ubiquitous in the animal kingdom. All mammals, all birds, probably some invertebrates, maybe octopuses. They're really, really smart creatures. Even creatures like honeybees, I think, have the kind of complexity and cognitive sophistication that I think at least some basic experiences might happen there. So, I think, I'm not sure about personhood, but some basic moral status I would extend to honeybees. And once you start thinking that consciousness is just, this pretty cheap phenomenon, right? And at least in its most basic forms, the idea that these incredibly complicated systems with, at this point, an order of magnitude more parameters than there are synapses in a honeybee brain, the idea that there might be some strange, exotic form of experience residing there doesn't seem outlandish to me. It also doesn't seem obvious, but I think it should be an open question. And the idea of legislating basically what seems like a scientific question seems to be getting things backwards, right? We should first conduct serious, I agree, very problematic, very challenging, methodologically fraught inquiry into saying, could these systems have something like the germ of personhood, the kernel of moral status, and then proceed, do our lawmaking on the basis of that, rather than deciding, well, we're going to decide these things are not conscious, just as at a legislative level. That seems ass backward to me.
I wanted to ask Harvey a question. Harvey, I loved your talk, and specifically that point where, I love taking pictures in my free time, photography, and I have, the camera bigger than my head, and I work on it a lot and watch a lot of YouTube videos on how to do it. And then I do it and I brag to, my wife was very nice about it. And then I brag to my daughter. And then my daughter invariably gives me the side eye and says, you realize that this can be done a lot better with an iPhone, which is true. And I take it to be kind of, in a sort of example of your point. Why, how do we continue to find meaning in a world in which consistently machines can do everything that we do in more and more areas better than we can? And that seems to be the trajectory. And I guess one answer that I'd like to think is that we kind of have to get into the habit of doing things for their own sake. What the philosophers called autotelic activities that are their own purpose, as it were. So you take pictures for the sort of mastery of taking pictures. So I guess one question is, number one, do you buy that as a kind of answer to the problem that you posed? And number two, what does it take to do that? Because people aren't born being willing and sort of inclined to do that. It seems like that's a sort of learned capacity or a habit of mind.
Yeah, I think those are great questions. I mean, James and I were talking in the break about ceramics. So James was saying that I hope I'm not divulging something that's not on the podcast, but that his wife is a ceramicist. And I was saying that just anecdotally in my, lifetime, let's say the last 25 years, it seems like consumption of ceramics handcrafted ceramics has shifted a bit from where people were buying them to where now the thing is everybody's making them. So everyone I know, not everyone I know, but there are, I can name 5 people who have serious ceramics practices on the side of what they're doing. And that's an interesting sort of trajectory. Of course, we've been in a position where machines could make sort of quote unquote better ceramics than people for a long time. And there was a time when, you really preferred the handcrafted ones. And now there's the kind of like Nir's photography practice. I guess I have a couple of thoughts about that. I mean, I certainly agree that these sort of things that we do for their own sake are part of a flourishing life. So this is another thing I was saying to James in the break. And I think, we are going to move to a world where we have a lot more time for our hobbies. And those things, or potentially, if things go well, actually, this is the good case, we have a lot more time for our hobbies, and we create communities more around them, and we share around them. But I'm not sure that, and so, I think that is important, but I'm not sure that totally answers the question that I have about culture. So I think I'm looking for a word for this, and maybe someone in the audience can help me, but the thing that I'm worried about with culture is not so much that someone individually can value their hobby. Plenty of us do that, but that we could get to a point where like other people aren't mean to you because your hobby is your sort of main stage event. And I think a lot of us are like, I wouldn't be mean to somebody, but BS, you totally would. So I think we're just used to a world where, if you're, it's just the kind of comment you would make after a dinner party or whatever, after meeting somebody is like, gosh, I can't believe that ceramics is all they do, or whatever it is. And that's just the way that we're used to talking. And maybe it's not you yourself, but someone who talks that way. And that is just a big part of somehow where we are around work and hobbies. So I feel like that's more the cultural
right,
part.
But then they'll be doing ceramics too, so they'll think twice, right?
Yeah, right. So you might be right that there's no sort of ex-ante problem to solve. So I think that's an interesting answer to the challenge I was posing, is that, maybe that just happens of its own accord, that fewer people are working and, this. But I'm optimistic that could happen for our, maybe like kids who are them. But I don't know about a lot of us who are sort of trapped in these middle generations. I think it's very hard to shift direction. And so I feel that for the sort of transitional people, assuming, that things go well, there's going to be a big question. You read these fascinating interviews. This was just one that really stuck out to me. It didn't make it into the essay that I was kind of, shortening in the talk. But this is Ilya Sutskever, who was one of the founders of OpenAI, who left in the sort of leadership transition when Altman took over in this kind of crazy situation about the nonprofit. But he's asked in one of these early podcasts from 2020 or 2021, this Dwarkesh podcast, that's a big tech podcast. They ask him, so what are you going to do after AGI? And he says, I think the AI is going to help me figure it out. And I just feel like I think we could probably think about it a bit in advance. The idea that that's going to be something that we can offload seems surprising to me. Yeah.
We also talked before about, and this is slightly off topic of AI, but the degree to which we control the brain and control our mood, I think, is also advancing. And so the idea that we will always be in a situation where we feel some kind of ennui about not having paid labor. I totally agree. I think we've been sold a bill of goods by capitalism. I want Marx's fishing in the morning and, farming in the afternoon and writing poetry in the evening. I think that's the ideal life, and we can all find flourishing in our own ways in that future. But I also worry about a future in which we have enough control over our brains that we could become Sisyphus, a happy Sisyphus. We could just say, okay, whatever I'm doing. And in a way, stimulant medication, which I've been on since I was like 6, but stimulant medication, that's what it does. It makes you happy and attentive to whatever you're doing. And so is that future, I think, more challenging than even a future where we have enough leisure to find our own meaning?
Yeah, thanks. That also gives me time to respond to a part of Nir's question that I didn't answer. But first, I just want to say, I closed that last comment by saying that I thought it would be surprising if AI could help us figure out what to do in a post-AGI future. I'm not sure that it would be surprising. I just think we need to build more infrastructure for that in advance. Yeah, so I think de-skilling. So Henry talked about the possibility of social de-skilling in his talk, and this is a sort of term that people use. That like, yeah, if it's just so easy to go to the chatbot, you'll be, we'll all suffer de-skilling for various things that now we're highly skilled at. And you're suggesting that taking care of your own emotions might be something that we sort of get de-skilled at. And I think Nir was suggesting that even our hobbies are things that we might become de-skilled so that we don't necessarily engage with our hobbies. There's a way in which our current system of schooling, trains us for work, but it also trains us to do lots of other stuff with passion and with a lot of scaffolding that we come to take meaning in. I think I have a maybe strange view about this, which I think a lot of the conversations that we have about how people are using AI right now is filled with like, they shouldn't be doing this, or I don't want to live in a world where people are doing this. And I sort of think it's a brave new world out there, and I would like to see lots of different cultures and subcultures evolve. I was at a conference about AI where people were saying, like, I could never imagine if I found out that somebody had written their condolence note to me with AI. And I thought, yeah, I wouldn't like it. But at the same time, I could imagine there's a group of people who feel like it writes a better condolence note. And, we're sort of happy to, help each other in a way that is aided by the tools. And so I don't want to say ex ante that, the people who want to live in what I would describe as the experience machine, where they're pretty, de-skilled on taking care of their emotions and they're just, popping surgical soma all the time, that it's not what I want to do with my brief time on this earth, but I don't want to say ex ante like that that subculture shouldn't be allowed to exist. So I think autonomy and lots of cultural diversity is something I would love it if this moment facilitates the possibility of there just being an enormous amount of cultural diversity in all kinds of directions that we currently can't imagine. Cultural diversity in how we relate to AI, diversity in how we relate to each other, and how we structure our hobbies and how we structure our work lives, how much these tools enter our various interactions.
Oh, just very quickly, I completely agree, Harvey, and I'm reminded of this great Mark Twain quote, which I'm probably going to butcher. Nothing is so in need of reform as other people's habits. And I think there's a real danger of this. We're entering a weird exploratory new phase of our relationship with technology, and I see people doing all sorts of fascinating things with AI, many of which can seem dystopian or weird. I got completely barraged on Twitter after I shared a screenshot of Claude telling me to go to bed. Because I was chatting to Claude. I have a terrible track record of going to bed on time. And Claude was like, hey, Henry, it's 2 a.m. You should go to bed. And the amount of disgust that this elicited from people who said, I would never let a chatbot tell me what to do. But it's like, I think, different strokes, different folks. And without sort of denying the need for regulation, to minimize the most extreme harms of these chatbots. I think we're going to go through a phase of what the philosopher John Stuart Mill would call experiments in living, a really productive, interesting phase. We'll figure out some ways of interacting with chatbots that are really bad, some that are really surprisingly interesting and productive, others that maybe not for everyone, but maybe work for some people. So I think allowing that kind of flourishing, that pluralistic flourishing of human-AI interaction is something we should be embracing rather than being afraid of.
If I could just say, but there's a tension between the experiments in living rhetoric, which I'm all on board with. An experiment in living means you can, first of all, let 1,000 flowers bloom. You could do a lot of experiments in living. I try this identity on, I try that identity on, I try, a flip phone on, I try, going with a smartphone on. So inherent in that, implied in that is that you can opt out or that, you could change the experiment. At the same time, we're hearing the language of sort of technological determinism from the tech companies, not only from Luddites, right? And the tech companies are saying AI is coming, like it or not. You either spend all your time on this, become very, very proficient in this, or you stay behind. You're betraying your students who are not learning this to a deep degree. And so that seems to suggest that there's only one set of experiments in living that's legitimate, and the other set of experiments in living is people who sort of are being left behind the future. So, I guess to me this boils down to a question of a burden of proof in some basic way. So to go to Harvey's point, right? there's going to be a ton of disruption. And in a way, it's exciting, right? But disruption is also disruptive. Like, for example, for those of you who are college and high school teachers here, essentially in the liberal arts, at this point, writing doesn't make sense anymore, or writing is becoming more and more destabilized, or you need to sort of jump through hoops and somersaults to figure out how to use a tool that you think can teach your students how to think without them using AI to write. And, writing was a good tool. It's been around for several thousand years. Plato was right that it disrupted oral culture, but that trade-off was probably okay in the end. A loss, but okay. But the thing is, what's going on, for example, in higher ed right now is not the tech industry trying to convince students and professors that they should start prompting with AI to learn skills of how to ask questions, but rather the professors and some students saying, we really want to write, but we can't anymore, or we really want to teach our student how to write, but does that make sense anymore? So to me, that's not an experiment in living, if that makes sense. It's just like sort of one set of experiments in living is kosher and the rest are not.
I just want to push back on your literacy.
Of course you do.
Yeah, your literacy chauvinism here. It's only in the last century that literacy became.
Made itself right there.
Well, it's only in the last century that the majority of human beings became literate. We've only recently adapted to what I call the beginning of.
Good.
So yeah, well, and I think so too, because I believe in its beginning of cyborgization. It's when we learn to download the contents of our minds onto external storage media and upload it again later through our eyes. But this is a very recent thing for our species to do, and now it's only in the last 6 years that we've been interacting with these new tools. So the fact that we haven't figured out every healthy adaptation to it yet is not at all surprising.
Yeah, something you said made me think of the old thing that we used to talk about in information ethics, which is the digital divide. And so I do think there may be this concern that, like early on when poorer people didn't have access to computers or the internet, and more things you were required to use the internet in order to just do things like, make an appointment. There's a concern that you're going to have this digital divide with AI as well. Right now it's free, but it's not going to stay that way. And also just the skills of people and being able to interact effectively with AI as well. And kind of jumping off of that point, just thinking about class issues more generally. Now I think I've forgotten my second point.
I would also say it's not free. I mean, the models that you pay for are way better. And I mean, it's basically an essential part of my research is I pay $100 a month to, have Claude, so it's definitely not free.
Yeah, I remember my second point, which was I talked to my students about, how about just having AI be your teacher? And they're like, no, we need the human connection. That's really important. But what I think is like, yeah, but it's expensive. And so I sort of see the possibility that what we'll end up with is that only the people at the most elite colleges will have face-to-face professors, and everyone else will be taught by AI.
We wanted to make sure that we have time to talk with all of you. So questions from the audience. Oh, wow. Do we have a traveling mic?
Hypothetically, say in some circles, AI goes beyond what you're considering personhood and achieves godhood. And then a religion forms around that that worship AI and believe that they're talking to the divine intelligence of the universe. Are they talking to the divine intelligence of the universe potentially, or are they talking to a stochastic parrot or some complicated random number generator?
Plenty of people, by the way, in Silicon Valley walking around with Claude in their ear and talking to the master of the universe already.
I would just chime in that I think there's an interesting parallel here with the kind of immanent versus transcendent ideas of divinity in different cultures. So in the Judeo-Christian tradition, or the Abrahamic tradition, I should say, we're used to thinking of God as this thing that sort of precedes and transcends the universe, and everything that exists is in some sense dependent on God. But a lot of other traditions, the Greek gods, the Norse gods, they're just super powerful beings that inhabit the world, and you want to placate them and propitiate them and so forth. So I think probably insofar as AI fits into a sort of spiritual inventory, it's close to the second kind of thing, right? I think there may, and I agree, we are already seeing some kind of spiritual feelings associated with AI, and I think we have been for a while. But yeah, better fit for the kind of more Greek model of a god than the Abrahamic.
I also think that one sort of underappreciated way of thinking about the whole, it's an encyclopedia of. It's constituted by an enormous amount of text, mostly human-generated still, even though there's some AI-generated text. So there is a way in which, worship is a really strong word. I wouldn't, that seems out there. But there is a sense in which it's a personification of like the totality of human ideas or something like that. And there is something kind of magical about being able to interact with, something that, in its better moments, is really capturing all of those, various experiences that are blended together. Of course, those better moments are rare, but there is an interesting way of thinking about it as a cultural artifact that directly represents the totality of things that people have written down.
I just think this is a place.
Each going to get 5 answers. None of us can keep our answers.
This is a place where moral philosophy really has a practical upshot with AI, is that if you believe that there is a moral truth that can be discovered through reason, and these things are going to be super reasoners, then they would all discover the same moral truth. They would converge on some kind of moral truth. But I don't, and what I'm much more worried about is that we're all going to use these to reinforce our own moral idiosyncrasies, right? It looks like you all agree.
Yeah, so maybe this pulls together a couple of ideas, maybe it doesn't. So much of what has been described about fear of AI removing meaning or value in life is from the perspective of all of us in this room who are not 7 months old. But I was thinking when we heard this talk earlier about the perspective of the 7-month-old being raised by an AI who's better than a parent. And I think that really, in my mind, what most of us probably really derive meaning in life from and value in life from is learning how to navigate life. And it's the learning part, right? And I think that the 7-month-old being raised by an AI, where everything is easy, never learns the meaning or to derive meaning from deriving the ability to get through life, dealing with the upset parent who's up late at night and can't handle them. And so my concern is not for us, because we're here, we've ruined things, we're wherever we are. My concern is that people in their when you're forming everything that happens in your brain to make you, you are not learning how to navigate a world. Everything's being easy. I think I'm much more afraid of that than I am about not being relevant in 2 years.
To be clear, I'm like a totally calm parent. I never freak out. I'm amazing late at night just because this is being recorded. We'll edit it out. Okay. I think this gets back to Nir's question about hobbies, or at least part of what I was getting from that question, which is if you never learn to do anything hard, it might not just limit your ability. It might be that sort of eliminating training that we currently think of as important for going into the workforce would also eliminate skills that you need to acquire for, you emphasize meaningful activities, but I would say leisure activities more broadly, but where leisure isn't like, just, low effort fishing or something, but where leisure includes high effort fishing, the sort of more involved, or photography, whatever the other habits are. So actually, it's an interesting fact. Maybe this is I am a philosophy professor, so I have to have some wisdom of this kind. But the word skole, that is our word for school, comes from the word for leisure. Aristotle had a whole sort of vision for how we should understand this leisure. And one thing that people have proposed, they happen to be university professors, so you should be a bit skeptical of this, but is that, maybe the future is people really spend a lot of time in a university-like setting where there's a lot of social, a lot of social engagement of a time that we don't often sustain past that moment because of, the difficulties of work and life outside. And also there's a lot of learning and exposure to new things and freedom, free time and freedom of association, to sort of form your own little groups. But as I think you're saying, that we need to preserve an element of taking on challenges, or else even things that are good for us for themselves in the photography, in this sort of photography example, are things that we won't be able to do.
Let's get some more questions. Oh, sorry, Kay.
As someone who reads all of Jane Austen's novels every year, I'm thinking about, in that period was exactly a period where you had people at the upper level, upper classes, for whom leisure was their way of life. And the women, they did embroidery and different kinds of things. And it's not because they did it better than the skilled craftspeople, but that was just sort of part of the culture to be doing that. And you raised your sons to be gentlemen, not to go into professions, but to be a leisured man of property. And in fact, in that period, being someone who had to work for your money was seen as a very lower position in the hierarchy. So we most certainly have had a culture like that. The one thing I see there, though, is hierarchy. And I see a human need to say some people are better than other people. And in that period, it was not having to work and having leisure time was the superior position. For us, we often think of working and being a self-made person. That is what gives you a higher level of status. So I kind of wonder, how will we find status in this new world, because humans really seem to need it.
Okay, thank you. So many good things to think about. But I'm really surprised, given the sponsorship of this talk, that we have not discussed the extraction of our Earth to use AI. When gallons and gallons of water are being used for every single prompt, what are your thoughts on that, and how does it fit into this larger conversation?
So I have a spicy take on this, which is that this is some of the most misleading coverage in the mass media of any environmental issue that I've ever seen in my life. And I say this as someone who is, I identify as an environmentalist. I've been an ethical vegetarian my whole life. And yet I think on the water issue in particular, and the New York Times, I think, has published several articles that are basically lies. I use that term quite deliberately. There are several moves in this debate. One of them is to give figures without context. They talk about X million gallons or X million watts of electricity without comparing that to the other things that we all do on a daily basis. So just to give a concrete example of this, we had a debate a couple of years ago about whether we should ban students from on our courses from using ChatGPT for environmental reasons. And we did some basic numbers, and we realized that for roughly the equivalent of 10,000 prompts, which would be way more than a student would use in a typical year, that had the same rough carbon footprint as a single paperback book. So, we said, are we going to ask our students, don't buy books, right? In reality, I think, there are long-term environmental questions about AI, about AI's environmental impact. I think if the kind of scaling of AI that some people envisage happens, if we're talking about an order of magnitude in the next 2 years and another order of magnitude after that, at that point, this stuff could be using a large fraction of US power generation. But on a lot of these issues, it really does seem to me the media environment's quite deceptive and fails to put into context the actual equivalent activities we do all the time, whether that's eating meat, whether that's taking foreign holidays. AI is a tiny, tiny fraction of that in terms of both water and energy usage.
I'll just add to that, China a year ago came out with the DeepSeek model, which used 1% of the amount of energy that the current models do. And we already know that the human brain is like powered by a light bulb, and does all kinds of things. So we're converging towards a much more energy efficient set of information practices. They're already mass producing organoid chips that have human brains grown onto computer chips. I'm not advocating advocating this as a path, but we probably will have a much more energy efficient AI future through those kinds of paths.
And sir, this will be our last question for the evening. We're running out of time. Please.
I make a quick comment about whether you think the Edison Electric Institute or the Department of Energy has actually got all their numbers wrong, and that's a separate conversation for offline. But I wanted to challenge the question that leisure is the only basis for meaning, and the only rationale for AI. In as much as there's some people who say, yes, leisure is the basis of culture, and great. Or leisure is the basis of many children playing in a sandbox, which an image you evoked almost. Or leisure is the basis for consumerism, which is probably the larger number and more recent number that we see evolving today. But it creates a problem, I think, for when everybody has leisure, no one might. We're at a question where the value of human life is going to shift as we feel that there's a different power driving our daily decisions. And I think one of the problems of the value of human life that this is so challenging to grope with is it's not just in the incidental question of agency or authenticity that you guys have raised, but also in the survivability of the community as an economic system.
So that's a great comment, and I think there's at least a few sort of thoughts in response. So if we do have more and more leisure, and we were just talking about this before, in Europe, regardless of AI, quite a few of the European countries already have more and more leisure, some of them practically moving to a 4-day work week. So one question is, there is going to have to be a policy solution to sustain people economically, to have them be able to buy what they need to survive, and also to pay somehow the smaller amount of people who still work. So I think that's, however you do that, guaranteed basic income or whatever plan you come up with, that is a complicated and necessary policy debate. The other question, though, that I think was implied in the exchange that Harvey and I had was that you need to know how to leisure. We're not born with that. And that actually 15 years of engagement with social media, and on that I think the data is pretty strong, have put us in a uniquely bad position to leisure. My colleague Gloria Mark from the University of California has found that the attention span, the average American attention span is 47 seconds. That's not enough to conduct. Yeah, well, Harvey's is 46, but it's not enough to do experiments in living, because you got to figure out what you're interested in and what you want to do. So, there are some preconditions for leisure that are, as my colleague said, that their schools have to start teaching them instead of preparing them for work. That's going to require the most massive reorganization of society and social institutions in 200 years. And we haven't even started thinking about that. My own sense is, if you want to peek into the future, how it will look if we don't take that seriously, it will look a little bit like that movie WALL-E that I'm sure that many of you have seen. That has become from a sort of a cheerful Disney love story between trash collecting robots into a pretty good prediction of the future, if it's not necessary, but if we don't get involved.
Yeah. I think it's a cheesy thing to say. I want to make 2 points. It's a cheesy thing to say, but I actually think that so I'm solving the writing problem in my classes by doing all Blue Book exams. I'm a hard ass. I think a huge problem in education is great inflation. My students are not happy about my crusade on this front. But, and I think it's actually about education for its own sake. I mean, this is a course in Chinese philosophy. They're learning weird, hard texts. But I think just doing something hard for doing something hard is really important for its own sake. And I really believe in that. And I think this is we need a clarion call right now to finding the fundamentals of education for this reason. Not for we're going to train them to go out into the workforce. Anyway, so that's one thing. But I really liked what you said about the market, which didn't come up in my earlier conversation about politics and the possible dissociation between, democratic power and economic power. I want to see policy solutions now that create a possibility for a more market solution in the future. So I would like to see policy solutions that empower each of us to have AI workers that we deploy in the workforce rather than them all belonging to Anthropic or, OpenAI or whatever. And that's honestly because I do believe in the power of the market as an informational technology that, and a political technology that's much more likely to solve the problem than UBI. I mean, UBI seems like, from my perspective, pie in the sky, both as a political and a sort of sustainable solution going forward. So I think we need to think about how it could be that individual people are empowered to still be economic participants in a future where they're not powered by their work, but instead powered by capital.
If we still have one more minute.
Can I just say something? I know there's no more questions, but can you speak to the disproportionate number of white academic dominant culture voices that have informed AI, male people who are powering it? Like even within this room, 80% of the questions have come from men. 90% of the panel is men. Like, can you speak to the skew in the system, and can you speak to the skew in how we're talking about how this is going to affect people with privilege versus the vast majority of the planet? Because it hasn't come up at all, and it feels like a huge loss.
So one thing I can comment on that. So I've been involved in some interesting survey work looking at attitudes towards AI in the global north versus the global south. And the really surprising result is that the global south is vastly more positive on AI than the global north. In fact, the single country that is most negative about AI is the United States. Europe, also pretty negative. India is the most positive. Southeast Asia, incredibly positive. Africa, incredibly positive. So, I mean, that obviously doesn't address the totality of your question, but I think a lot of the discourse around AI right now is dominated by Anglospheric pessimism, frankly, declinist narratives, possibly associated with the relative decline in global significance of traditionally hegemonic Western nations. And the dominant attitude in the global south, according to the survey data we've looked at, is a much more optimistic one that sees AI as a tool to empower and redress global inequalities and take away the honestly very real deprivation that still attends to much of the world and is much rarer in the global north.
I'll just add two more sociological observations. One is that technology attitudes are also gendered. Men tend to be much more interested and optimistic about gadgets. Women tend to have more communitarian concerns about their effects. And that's across the board, many different technologies. The other is that until now, higher education was a strong predictor of being optimistic about technologies in general, especially artificial intelligence. Most of us thought that higher education would be our insulation against the effects of automation, that it was going to be blue-collar people who would be affected more. ChatGPT and LLMs have really changed that picture. And for me, as a socialist, I'm looking forward to a white, higher educated people suddenly realizing that they're in the same boat as blue-collar folks and that we all have to get on the same page.
On that optimistic note, we're out of... Oh, sorry.
You can't leave the woman out after that question. Anyhow, one concern that I have, and I've already had it earlier about the internet, is the amount of the content that has been created on the internet by first world countries in English. So I do think there's a real concern about cultural imperialism here when all these AIs have been trained on that data. And how are we going to correct for that. If we stop having people writing stuff and putting it on the internet, if we're not encouraging the global south to be doing that such that that can then get scraped up as part of the AI, then where do those cultural ideas and norms, all that brilliance, right, that we talked before about, that AI has collected all this human brilliance, but it's not collected it equally?
Appropriately, Kate has the last word. So thank you very much, everyone.